again, and welcome to the In Scope podcast. It's John Scott. I will be your host for today. I am pleased to have my good buddy Henry Egan, who is a services sales manager over at SHI. He and I are kindred spirits when it comes to talking services. So, Henry, thanks for joining us, sir.
Yeah, absolutely, John. You're very excited to be here.
Yeah, man. So I want to pick your brain on a topic that we have talked about before, right? Which is kind of like the next evolution of what it's like to price, scope services, like all the things that go into making selling services, making scoping services easy, right? There's a lot of work that has to go into that process to make it easy. And so I just want to kind of flesh out like, hey, what's the end vision, and then back up and based on your experience, okay, where are the things that are going to catch people? What are the, what's part of the process that's broken today that you need to fix before you can even get to the easy step? Again, I think we could probably have like 10 shows on this topic, but I'm going to force you to talk about it in only 20 minutes.
That's going to be the biggest challenge.
Right, so, exactly. Yeah. If we have to split it up into multiple episodes, I won't have to pay you nearly as much money as I'm paying you now for this.
Oh, you're paying me? That's great. I didn't realize that.
And stickers. I'll send you a sticker.
Awesome. Well, my IT will love it when I put it on there. So go ahead.
Oh, good. Yeah. So I want to set the stage with like a little bit of my vision. And again, you and I have talked about this, so it might be some of your vision too. But like I think there's this world of I have an opportunity with a client, right? Right now it takes, we see metrics around like 18 business days to go from client has a need, they want to work with you, and all the stuff it takes into getting them a document, which allows you to do the work for them. You and I have talked about like how great would it be if I'm sitting there, I'm with the client, I'm listening to what they want, and like while I'm there, I'm filling out a form of some sort, I'm interacting with some web-based application or a chat bot or anything, right? And like literally could provide them with a scope or a budgetary estimate or something like while I'm there, as opposed to waiting 18 days. Like, is that where you see like the mecca, the end goal being for a lot of these organizations is kind of getting to that level of automation? And maybe you can put some color commentary around what you see or your thoughts around, the future.
Yeah. So, I have a ton of different salespeople that I support, in my region. And one of the biggest questions that I always get is just like, how much does this cost? And that historically has been pretty difficult to answer because of everything you already said is, okay, great. We got to get the request, got to come in. Then we have to go find the subject matter expert. We have to engage them with the customer subject matter expert. And then we have to go on this fact-finding mission and then put that fact-finding mission into some kind of calculator or something else. And it was always something that was really ad hoc, And it was always the biggest challenge because customers are really just interested to see, hey, number one, really quickly, tell me how much this costs. Well, first off, can you do it? Then tell me how much it costs, and then how fast can you get engaged? And one thing they didn't want you to hear is like, oh, okay, let's go into a 2 to 3 week sales cycle in order to kind of achieve that result. Yeah. And I've gotten that feedback throughout my career, directly from our salespeople, also from our customers. And it really challenged me to try and figure out like how could we solve that problem, because I can understand the why it's necessary. Yeah. And that's what like this is kind of how we got connected, right? It was literally solutioning this issue, and I'd gone down in the past to do what you guys have done so well, and build out tools that could actually help us answer that question in real time, but also enable other people who may not be the SMEs and subject matter experts to be able to answer that question. Yeah. So I looked at that as like, what is the force multiplier, right? What's the force multiplier that basically gives us into that allows us to answer those questions, meet those expectations, and get there? And that was pure and simple standards, of course, establishing standards and applying some kind of scale to those standards through a tool.
Yeah. And that's what I want to get into, right? Which is, in order to get to this force multiplier, as you put it, or this kind of, in order to really solve this problem, like, what's all the work that you have to do, step 1, 2, 3, like where does someone even begin, like, their journey to solving this and building a force multiplier or using a tool like ScopeStack as a force multiplier, right? Like, where do you start?
Man, if I was to start, I would start in just like with the core services that we offer, right? I would say that. I would also be, what is the tool that you're going to use? And then I would stick to basically the things that are in the core of what you're trying to basically go after. I don't know if that answers your questions, because I think that a lot of people don't even think about tools as the answer here. I think they just think that we have to do this through Excel, through Word, and through a lot of different, just manipulating paper. To me, it's not the answer.
Yeah, and we see a lot of different levels of maturity, right, in terms of where people are in this journey. The clients that we typically get are the ones that are a little bit further on down that maturity roadmap or path or whatever. But like some organizations, they don't have a spreadsheet. Like, there's no consistent way to price anything. There's no even Word template, right? So like, I think if you were to start somewhere, to your point, like, what's your superpower? What are you really good at? Like, and just write that down. Write down like an example statement of work. Write down, again, in a spreadsheet, like, what are the steps? How long do I think this is going to take on average? Like, just something, like, just put it down on paper. Like, it's probably a really good first step. And again, like, I've been there and I've done that, and it's easier said than done sometimes, because you have to really think about, okay, how am I going to price this, and how am I going to, go down this road? But like, you got to start somewhere.
The unit cost information. Well, that's the unit. Like, I mean, when you think about the services that you provide, what is the unit base, like the fundamental foundation of that service, right?
Right.
So whether it's either, Microsoft, email migration, or, a field services activity, it could be anything under the sun. But what is the fundamental baseline of those units? And I would say that each offering might be a little bit different too, because what you're looking at is just kind of being able to expedite the path to the sale, and you have to basically put the knowledge of the quoter into language and put prices associated to that language, right? Because what we sell is language, and that language equals a level of effort, and it equals a cost and everything else. So one of the biggest things that we always have challenges with is exactly that. Are you putting the right language in the SOW that's going to articulate the right cost at the same time? And that's a tough thing to manage.
Well, 100%. Right. And the first step is defining those pieces. But then if you can go the next step, which is what you're talking about, and like aligning the way we describe this service, the language for the service, and how it's priced, like those two things aligning together is like, that's kind of another step of complexity, and it's hard. And it's real hard to do that in spreadsheets. Right. I've actually seen it done where there's really great spreadsheets. You click a button, macros, do all these things, and out spits a document, right? So I've seen that, right? And then, so I think that's what you're talking about. Like, that's a great way to talk about it. That like you're selling language, and you're selling one voice, right? So we don't want it to be Henry's voice. We don't want it to be John's voice. We want it to be the organization's voice and how we deliver the service.
Right, and that's the other issue right there, is that that's the goal, is to sell one voice. But in reality, it's usually not the case. It's usually the individual's opinion about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it and stuff like that. And that's where you can get into some trouble, I think.
If I'm a pre-sales engineer and I don't like the way that we do email migrations, I might change it a little bit based on the way I think it should be written, right? And like, that's not really what you want. I just need you want to get to the point where users can consume the standards that are laid out and not have to reinvent the wheel every single time.
Yeah, and I might rant here for a little bit of a second, because I got into this, I got into this by solving one single problem, and that is, how do I get an SOW out to a customer a lot faster? really what I was starting to understand is that we're actually going to solve a lot of other problems with this, because you have the other kind of components of just managing the business, right? So when you think about things like skewed services and everything out there, fundamentally they just don't hit the expectations for the customer.
Right.
You know, it's a great way to scale up and get a quote out really quickly and say this, but what I've experienced in the past is customers just don't really get the value out of skewed services that they want. You know, it doesn't hit the expectation. I'll say that all the time, you know.
No, I completely agree, because like, yeah, SKU gets you the speed. It doesn't really get you like the customization piece that is the tailoring of that solution for your client, right? Like if you're talking about a skewed service, like it is what it is and you don't get to change it. And do you try to shoehorn that or add other services around it to make it fit? It to your point, like it never feels natural, right?
It gets confusing, and you're working off of multiple service briefs. How do you get to the outcomes that customers are really looking for?
Yeah.
And you really have to articulate that. But then the other side of the other guardrail would be fully customized SOWs, you know, that are completely, you know, unique language, no standardizations, have to go through an approval process, almost like a committee-like thing to basically say, does this seem like it's a profitable project, or it's just a good project? So all of those are, you know, those are where I think the business has always been. It's either in one guardrail or the other. And I think that the natural medium in there is where you could get to, and I've talked to you about this, where it's like semi-custom SOWs, which is standards, you know, that are stacked on top of each other that really fully articulate a well thought out project, but that are also able to be customized to a degree to meet those customers' you know, expectations and deliver the value of that project or that service. But when you do that, I mean, and this is where I was saying, where we solve one problem, we get into solving a lot of others, is that now we have a mechanism to measure what we do and what we think is a standard, and to actually manage it effectively. Because, okay, great, we sold this one type of service, and, you know, what was the outcomes of each of those projects? Well, it was over scoped, or it was under scoped, you know, the budget wasn't nearly big enough, or it was way too much. Now we can go back in and refine that at the top of the funnel, you know, with that, and make sure that everything kind of comes in now, and we can constantly refine it. So to me, it was a much bigger tool to also help us just manage the actual business of our services organization, and to help us just constantly get better and better and better.
Yeah. You know? Yeah. And I always think about like the piece you're talking about, where like skewed and custom services, there's like this inverse relationship, if you will, or seesaw or scale, where sales, you know, highly paid people such as yourself, Henry, like you want to get as many services projects out the door to clients, like you want to sell, like you want throughput, right? Yeah. The delivery organization, who you were also responsible for at one point, like they want accuracy. Like when you give them a statement of work or one project, like, okay, what are we delivering today? They want to be set up for success to go deliver that. Like who wouldn't, right? And those two things, like if you're going to give like that full level of detail, typically you're not going to get the speed and throughput. And if you want the throughput, you're really not going to get the speed. So like, how do you level those, you know, how do you level those two things out where you can get speed and expectation and accuracy on the delivery side, right? Like that's really like the ideal world, you know?
Well, time kills deals, you know, always talk about that. You know, the longer we take to try and figure something out for a customer, they probably moved on to another solution and so on, or try to find another way.
Yeah. And I've worked at like large organizations, similar to yours, and like going after enterprise, like time may not kill a deal. It doesn't help. But when you start talking about commercial, when you start talking about like pretty much the rest of the market, right? Like you have to be fast, because you're right. Like, you know, someone will go, my attention span is really short. If I ask someone for a quote or a scope and it doesn't get to me for 2 weeks, like I'm done. Like I've figured something else out. You're 100% correct. And so if you can like solve this problem, you can address the commercial, you can address enterprise, you can address SMB, like there's all sorts of good stuff you can do.
Yeah, and I actually think you can address one of the bigger things is just operating costs for your organization. Because how much time are you putting your people into actually managing paperwork versus talking to customers, having those value-added conversations, and meeting those expectations quickly.
Right.
My vision was always like, I talked to my team when we were building out all the SOWs. It's like our goal is to have a same day sal. We wanted the same day sal.
Yeah.
And previously we were working on like maybe a 5-day SLA, sometimes maybe even longer on more complex engagements. And, I just thought if we could just get there and, set the price expectation and the scope expectation, we're probably going to win a lot more business.
Oh yeah. Like I remember, that's what I always wanted, right? Where I worked and, having done that. And we actually had a customer that had a very similar SLA. They were like, we were at 5 days. We wanted to get down to, like a single day potentially, but they were like, we got to the point where we are actually getting them a statement of work while we're in there with the meeting. Like that's a huge competitive advantage,
Yeah, I've used it before and everything else, and it's great because you talk to customers and it's just like, how much could this cost? Well, let me ask you a couple quick questions. Put it in there, and we're able to basically pop out a budgetary number right away, and then really an SOW in a lot of cases. Yeah. And I mean, you want to spend the right amount of time on the right opportunities, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And I've always talked to like my guys. I'm like, well, the level of effort in quoting a $50,000 project and a $500,000 project is roughly the same in the normal world of building SOWs the way that with Word, with Excel, and everything else. But if we can get to something that's like what we know is core to us, that it has to be, it's not a skewed service, right? It's customizable and stuff. Like I always go back to like the Exchange mailbox migration, right? We've done thousands of those over the course of my career and such. And everything was a little bit different based on customers' environments, but there were so many things that were so similar. That we could, the target was always the same, right? But it was just like the environment of which they were operating was the only thing that really determined the cost of the engagement, as well as the amount of mailboxes and everything else that we were moving. Sure. Yeah. So when we started to think about this thing, it's like, this is core to us, but the project size is, anywhere from 50 to 100K on average. And, we just want to spend the appropriate amount of time on just making sure that we're quoting them out the right way so that we can spend even more time on the truly customized SOWs, like the ones that are just a little bit more of a snowflake kind of a project. And They might be worth a little bit more money and stuff like that. And if we could handle those through that process, number one, improving our customer experience because they're getting the information that they need to make a business decision so much faster. Mm-hmm. And then we're also releasing time from really valuable resources so that they can now go and spend it, on other engagements or more value-added work. I just don't see a lot of value in, just really kind of managing the paper, if you will. Yeah. And so that was the struggle.
Yeah.
And
So like thinking through like, the evolution of this whole process, right? Whether it's tooling or whatnot, mm-hmm. like, web-based tools, like, do you see a future where if you build it well enough, like you could extend forms, questions to your end customer? Like where they could just say, they come to your website and they say, I want to do an Exchange migration to your example, 15 mailboxes and blah, blah, blah. Right.
Yep.
They answer that. They could get a price back. They could get a statement of work like automatically sent to them. Like, do you think that's possible?
Absolutely. I think it's totally possible. I think it's even more, either it be directly with customers or directly with sales, accessing to the tool or anything else. I think it's as long as the UI experience is actually pretty easy. And like I said, it's not going to have to be an engineer. I think that there's also another component of that where it's like, hey, we can actually either run a script and the output of that script comes in and it's an SOW. Because we do a lot of discovery work through some scripts and such like that just to capture some baseline information about the environment. But if we could even get to that level where, all right, we have custom scripts that we know that we've developed to go and do that discovery work on our behalf, and that information just feeds right back into into a tool that can kick out a accurate SOW, to me, that's like almost like the perfect world. So.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. So like, some sort of discovery tool where it's looking for, okay, how many users, how many mailboxes do you have? Like, to your point, there are tools out there that'll do that today, but it's kind of on an island in itself. Like, you get the information, like, now what? Take some manual intervention and say, plug this number into that one. But like, technology or software, like anything's possible, right? Like, I think that's a really cool idea. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give credit for that one too.
Absolutely.
If you implement that.
2 more stickers for you.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. But I think that there's a lot of different ways. It's just like, how do you capture information in a very efficient path? Because I mean, even for sales, I the struggle sometimes is to maybe sometimes get sales to fill out the form. Sometimes it's the struggle to get customers to fill out the form. But whatever makes it easier or simpler is going to be the best path. And simple is not easy. Sometimes simple can be complex, but it's definitely the best route.
Yeah, and that's what, I wanted to pick your brain. Like, I think we have really good ideas on where we want to go, but it's easier said than done, right? So there's a lot of legwork. There's a lot of foundational work that needs to be done before you can have this perfect world scenario of what we were just talking about, right? And then again, like, I don't know about you, but I don't think there should be. I think it could be possible. I don't think there should be a world where we automate so much that there's no human involvement. Like, I think the relationship piece of these deals are honestly just as important as the data, right? Like, it can't just be a machine. It can't just be a number. Like, there has to be a relationship built in order for you to have a proper type of client partner alignment,
Yeah, because you don't cover the expectations, right? Like, the expectations of customers on that is not a quantitative item, I mean, it's described. It's almost sometimes emotional, and it can be a lot of times. It is very emotional, and there's other factors that you have to basically be involved with, and it definitely takes I would say almost a consultative approach to kind of understand that. Because if you don't, then you kind of run the risk of getting to that kind of SKU-based place. It's like, I've seen some tools where it's like, hey, you're selling this. Here are the SKUs that you should add to it. And it's like, how do you know those are the SKUs that I should add to it? You don't know anything about the customer. You have no idea what they're trying to do. So
and so I don't want people listening to this to think that like I'm all for, or you either. Like, I don't think we are for a non-human approach. Like, it's this is just a way to enable more of those human conversations, as like because we can't have them today because we're spending 10 hours writing a Word document.
What's the most valuable thing you could be doing, and go do that instead of some of the other kind of just blocking and tackling.
Like I want to equip engineers and pre-sale, like, because again, they're some of the most valuable, expensive resources in an organization like ours. And if I can save 3 of the 4 hours of their day where they can be spent with a client or whiteboarding or virtual or whatever, like, that's why we pay them that much money, right? It's not to copy and paste stuff onto a document.
Well, then you also, it's like that person can only go so far too. So say you do have the subject matter expert, the practice lead, right? And that practice lead really, does a great job interacting with customers and doing that. But you have a lot of customers, that practice lead can only reach so many different people. But if you can take the understanding that individual has and put it into, a tool that has it's based on standards that can even kind of articulate phases of the engagement and so on, and really scale up like a planning phase or scale up maybe a knowledge transfer phase based on the customer and their maturity level in a certain area, then, you can really take all the knowledge of that practice lead or the SME, and that's where I think the force multiplier comes involved. And so on, and you get to scale them out tremendously.
I love, force multiplier. I think that's a big thing. Like, how do you build that out, to your point, build it out and allow those standards to be consumed as if that person was there scoping it, right? That's how you multiply the force of these SMEs. Like, what are some of the other, again, like, you've lived this journey, like, Like, what are some of the areas that have caught you up in the past, or been roadblocks, or slowed down the business and like towards this evolution? What are some of the other gotchas that you think would be helpful to identify for folks listening?
I think it's the biggest thing is just trying to develop those standards. Because I think sometimes you have to get your head wrapped around it a little bit. Well, like, how do you start these off? We have a couple different offerings. One was a data center migration where it was really just, hey, we need to move terabytes of data, block data, right, from one environment to another. And I used to get that all the time. How much does this cost? And it was just like, we started working on this, and we started to figure out how could we develop, and build the SOW in a quick fashion. But how do we develop a pricing model around this that's easy for somebody to understand? And I mean, we racked our brains on this one for a long time, but we ultimately found, number one, we knew the amount of data was going to be a big, determining the price and effort and so on. But we had to really just kind of figure out like what are the things that affect cost. And we ended up like kind of creating this kind of Rubik's cube of pricing. It's almost like I always to say it's like 3-dimensional pricing, right? Yeah. We use like the x-axis and the y-axis, but then we had another axis that we had to kind of like figure out and to get to that perfect price. And ultimately it was based on the amount of hosts the customer had, the amount of data that they had, and there was an appliance involved in this process where it kind of, helped the migration and so on, and without getting into too much detail. Yeah. And that appliance required a rental, fee or anything else. And, it was funny. It was like, okay, so based on this much data, this much time, and this many hosts, we could figure out the rental fee associated to that as well. So there were multiple basically facets of that. And that was the hardest thing, which like, what are the units that fundamentally define this every single time? And I think that's the biggest challenge, is that you have to kind of understand what you do. What are the components of what you do, and then how do you break that down into something that's that works, that's repeatable, that actually can produce an accurate price every time. But as soon as you start to do that with your offerings, I think the clouds part, and you start to see exactly how you could apply this to multiple different scenarios. So I think that's the biggest challenge, is kind of getting started and trying to figure out what your unit-based cost is for your offering, because you only know that.
Right. Who was involved in those conversations and trying to figure out those 3 dimensions? Was it pre-sales, post-sales, combination?
100%. Bro, it was definitely both. It was pre-sales and post-sales. Yeah. I represented the pre-sales component of it all at that point in time, because I was the one in charge of kind of building those SOWs out, and I was getting the questions about them all the time. Right. But in order for me to come to that conclusion, I had to work with the post-sales teams on, if I'm doing this, do you guys agree with that? And sometimes we got into, different conversations about,
first rule of Fight Club,
would it not work?
Like that sort of thing.
But debates, good, healthy debates and stuff. But man, I learned so much during that process, just understanding the fundamentals of what goes into each one of these engagements. And I learned a ton about each one of those offerings through that process. And I think that the delivery team also got a really good insight into how we do the discovery and such. So it was definitely fulfilling for all parties.
Well, I think it's, that practical knowledge. Right. It's really hard to price out a service that's theoretical, that you've never done before. So
yeah,
more than likely you're going to want to start.
Impossible, right?
Pretty much impossible.
Yeah.
I want to be kind, but if you're starting to think about going down this process, like, how do I fix this? How do I, where do I start in this journey? It's doing exactly what you and your team did, but for services that you've delivered, because you need to have the practical experience of doing it to make it meaningful, right, and make it repeatable. So, well, look, man, I think you and I could talk about this stuff for days, and it probably put some people to sleep, but it probably excites some other people. So, If we were going to kind of wrap this up and I was to ask you, hey, what's one bit of advice that you would provide to organizations? And I'll even let you have two things, Henry, just because you're a good guy. But like, if you were going to provide advice for people starting this journey, where would you tell them to start? What would you tell them as the first thing to do?
I would start with the most core services you have, the one that you know the best, for sure. And I wouldn't let good be the enemy of perfect. I think when you think about services in general, they're delivered by people for the most part. And, I always tell everybody all the time, you actually have good CCIEs and you have bad CCIEs, they're all CCIEs, but some are actually better than the other ones. And some, we're people. Sometimes we'll do other things better and faster than other people, but ultimately you're playing the laws of averages here. So I feel like, if I have a tool and an offering that hits the expectation 80% of the time, I'm winning. Now, on the other 20% of the time, I may make more money or I may make less money, but that's okay. It doesn't matter as long as the customer's really happy with the engagement and the outcomes and everything else, and your people are given the tools they need to be successful for the most part, for most engagements. Then you're just left solving the ones on the that you just need to solve. But sometimes everyone's trying to basically just make it perfect where it doesn't.
Think about all the things that could go wrong, or all the options, all of it. Yeah.
We live in a world that if something's going to go wrong, and ultimately you just have to monitor, measure, and manage throughout this engagement. You're not going to get it perfect the first time, but you might build to perfection.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Again, especially someone that's been there, has done it for both big, small, really large, right? Like, you've lived it. And so, I think that's a great call out. The people part of it is a variable that you can't automate. And whether that's the client side, whether it's the delivery side, any of the sides, right? So I think that's really good advice for sure.
I appreciate it, man. I think that the biggest challenges and stuff like that out there are just like, get this kind of tool, have this kind of mindset, and then you can really go out and grow and scale your business and such. I think it's a huge help. But it's definitely the future. It's gonna, you guys are leading the way too, man.
Well, I appreciate it. It was selfish to start because it was extremely painful for me, and I'm just thankful there are other people that get it. So my mom will understand why I quit my job. So, no, I'm just kidding. So Henry, tell us where people can find out more about you, get in touch with you, a little bit about the organization if they're interested.
Yeah, so I'm in Texas as of right now. I support pretty much all the customers for SHI in the Tola regions and such. But you can definitely always, reach out to me, via to my email and everything else. I can give you that information. Yeah. But I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on all the normal stuff. So if anybody has any kind of questions or just wants to reach out and talk shop, I'm definitely down with it. It's something I live and breathe every single day. Incredibly passionate about it, and love to explore new ideas.
Yeah, man. TikTok. Are you still doing your dancing on TikTok or no? Did you start doing it?
I stopped that one. I never did that at all.
No, ever. I like to throw those curveballs in there. No, but again, seriously, man, thank you for bringing your wisdom to the InScope podcast. For those of you that are interested in finding out more, listening to some more of these podcasts, you can find us at scopestack.io/podcast. Subscribe on all your favorite channels, and check us out. As Henry said, he mentioned it. We're leading the way around scoping, services automation. And again, I think there's more to come, right? So thank you for listening in, and we'll talk soon.